Okay, it is a massive big day on Kapow today. We have Nicola Scott with us. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Nicola.
Thank you very much for having me.
No, it's a real pleasure.
Thanks.
Now, look, we want to get into, just start with a bit of background, how you got into comics in the first place, really.
Getting into, I was kind of getting into the characters as a kid, but it wasn't really through comic books. It was through TV shows and the films. You know, I didn't really have access to comic books. When I was a kid, I'd just come from a big girl family, and there weren't any geeks amongst us except for myself.
Right.
But when I decided to get into the industry, it kind of came about because the careers that I had been pursuing weren't really paying off in the way that I wanted, and it had come down to knowing that I needed to do something creative, knowing that I could draw, and wondering if I had to draw the same thing all day, every day, what would I be happy drawing? And I thought, God, it'd be nice if I could just draw Wonder Woman every day. And as soon as that occurred to me, I was like, oh my God, that's a job.
Yeah,
that's an actual job that somebody has. I want that job.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And you've probably been in the industry for a while now. I mean, have you found, as you're developing your style, have you found it's best to develop your own specific style or be more flexible since you have to work on so many different titles?
Oh, look, a little bit of both. The comic book industry, the way it's kind of been developing for a good long time now, is very much on the identity of the creators as well as the identity of the central characters. And so having a style that is identifiable with you is great, but you still need to be able to work within a certain flexibility. When I first started off, I would say my style was a little more similar to someone like Terry Dodson.
Okay.
And when he got the gig on Wonder Woman before I started working at DC Comics, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to shift somewhere. And where I felt like would be a better place for me was just to sort of maybe butch up my art a little bit, make it a little bit more masculine, not quite so pretty, just to kind of counteract the fact that I'm a girl. I think a guy can get away with having pretty art, but a girl can't necessarily get away with having pretty art unless you're Amanda Connor.
It's an interesting point. I mean, what are some of the things that you've learned over this time that, for budding artists, people who are wanting to get into this industry, any pitfalls, any things to aim for?
Oh gosh,
it's a broad one. Sorry.
Yeah. Look, I think the thing that a lot of people who are wanting to get into the industry, it's one of those industries that everyone that's a fan of, everyone who's a big comic book reader, they all want to work in the industry. They all hope for that. Yeah. I think one of the things that's incredibly underestimated is how much work it is. Sure. Not just getting in, but once you've got a job, it's an extraordinary amount of work. You know, I'm rarely out from behind my desk. You know, I come out to do conventions, and you know, I try very hard to make time for my friends and family. But I'm working on a monthly book, and for the period of time that I've been at DC Comics, which is 6 years, I've had very little in the way of a social life. Right. But that's just because that's the nature of the job. And so I think that's one of the primary things that people underestimate. But it's also finding your voice, finding a way to differentiate yourself from your peers, and continuing to build your way towards your goal. I think a lot of people that want to work in the industry, they'll find along the way, they find their plateau, they find where they're comfortable, they'll find where they're happy, or they'll find themselves where they're not happy and they'll move into a slightly different direction. Sure. They'll find themselves working at a big company and they'll just like, no, I want to work in creator-owned, or vice versa. Sure. I think that is an important thing to be aware of as your career progresses, is staying aware of what the next goal is and moving towards it. Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned the conventions, you're having to spend a lot of time going out to those. So there's been a lot of more movement, I think, in that lately, as well as a lot of cross-referencing into movies and games, and there's been a big focus on comic culture. Why do you think that has been so much lately, as somebody in the industry?
Geek culture is mainstream.
Yeah.
I think with the evolution of the action film becoming a superhero film,
sure,
franchises taking over speculative first films that might get a sequel, there's so much money to be made from geek properties, geek-related properties, and I think that in itself is driving driving the industry in a much more sort of dynamic way. You know, there's way more merchandise than there ever used to be.
True, yeah.
There's way more sort of out of the direct market merchandise than there ever used to be. I think that there is this access and interest in general culture, pop culture, that just that wasn't necessarily there, and now it's being fed really well. You know, when we get a superhero movie now, it tends to be one of the best rather than one of the crappiest, which it might have been in the 90s.
Yeah, things like Daredevil and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. You know, they were like, yay, we're getting one, bummer, it's disappointing. But, you know, now they're the biggest box office earners.
It's true.
And I think that's changing.
The money's going in that direction.
Yeah,
so,
I think if that's where the money's going, then the industry is growing. And we have sort of, you know, shows like Big Bang Theory, which, you know, most nerds that I know hate the show.
Yeah.
But it is mainstreaming geek culture in a way that, you know, we might not necessarily feel represented in the show, but it's making it all very much part of the lexicon, which it's never been before.
Yeah, so I suppose there's good things and bad things about that really out there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Now, another thing that's been quite big and is becoming bigger is digital comics.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you've recently had one out with Tom Taylor in the Legends of the Dark Knight.
That's right.
Do you think that sort of format, you know, digital specific comics, are the future of comics, or is it just another way of getting the story out?
I think for the moment it's just another way of getting the story out. The nature of comic books themselves, the market for them, the audience is still very much the tactile audience. They want the ownership. They're the people who are collectors. You know, they're not necessarily collecting whole trades runs of Spider-Man back to the 60s, but they do want the paper product in their hands.
Something they can hold. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think as the younger generation comes through, the kids who, you know, now, you know, so far removed from paper, because technology is providing everything that they need, digital might be more significant in a decade or two.
Yeah.
But I think even once it sort of grows, and I think it will grow, I think there's always going to be a market for the printed material.
Yeah.
You know, even if it's just things come out digitally monthly, but they get traded in book.
Yeah.
Because people want that on the shelves.
Yeah.
It's not the same as having it in a it's not the same as having it in a library in your USB port.
Being able to display it on your shelf.
Yeah, you want to be able to look at it.
There's a happiness to that, I find. Yeah.
It's a completely different experience.
It is. All right, well, look, it's been fantastic having you on the show.
Thank you for
you
letting me waffle on.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. And once again, just thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Take care.